The 1960s in America were the era when big V8s roared on every street, and people were obsessed with showing off raw speed in heavy, overpowered, gas-guzzling monsters. From California to Jersey, everybody believed that if you wanted to own a racetrack, you needed a Corvette, or some exotic, high-dollar European sports car. Back then, the Mustang was seen as nothing more than a stylish secretary's car, perfect for the younger crowd, but absolutely not a serious weapon built to destroy racetracks. Then, right when the whole world was convinced brute horsepower was the only thing that mattered, a story broke that sounded downright ridiculous. A little Mustang could actually put a Corvette in its rearview mirror. The car world lost its mind. Nobody had ever imagined a Mustang stepping into the playground of purebred sports cars. And the man behind that game-changing upset? Carroll Shelby. The guy who looked at a Mustang and saw something nobody else did. That's when the journey began to create the original track-destroying Mustang legend, the Shelby GT350R. Before the GT350R legend was even born, Ford was riding sky high, but secretly nervous. The Mustang had exploded out of the gates, posting sales numbers the company hadn't seen in decades. But deep in the executive offices, the top brass knew the hard truth. No matter how many they sold, the Mustang was still just a sharp-looking fashion statement, not a weapon that could actually beat the competition on a racetrack. To most Americans back then, if you were talking real speed, you were talking Corvette and the rest of GM's high-performance arsenal. Lee Iacocca, the guy who dreamed the Mustang into existence in the first place, was dead set on changing that. He wanted Ford in the racing game for real, not just pasting some stripes on a car and calling it a day. Problem was, not everybody inside Ford agreed. A bunch of old-school engineers thought the Mustang was too soft, too heavy, and nowhere near fast enough to take on a Corvette. In their minds, it should stay the cool kid's cruiser, not try to play with the big dogs on the track. The argument got so heated that Ford realized they weren't going to settle it in-house. So they did something radical. They handed the keys to the Mustang platform to the one guy in America crazy enough to turn an ordinary car into an absolute monster, Carroll Shelby, the man who'd already built the Cobra into a Chevy killer. From that moment on, the Mustang stopped being just another pretty mass-market pony car and started its transformation into a stone-cold track assassin. Carroll Shelby didn't see the Mustang the way any Ford engineer did. To him, the stock car was a rough diamond, way too nose-heavy, way too soft in the corners, and loaded down with stuff that looked pretty, but did nothing for speed. Shelby's rule was brutally simple. If it doesn't make the car go faster, it doesn't belong on the car, period. And with that, the strip-down began. First came the outside. The nose got stretched and lowered. The front valance cut wide open so that hungry 289 cubic inch V8 could breathe deep. A tall, muscular power bulge was hammered into the hood, so aggressive that the car looked like it was already moving while sitting still. Pure menace even at a stoplight. Then the body. Every unnecessary trim piece, every chrome doodad the regular Mustang bragged about, gone. Fenders were swapped for lighter ones, side glass thinned, excess bracing tossed overboard. The car started shedding weight like a fighter cutting water before a weigh-in. Inside was where it got serious. Back seat? Deleted. Sound deadening? Ripped out. The doors were so light you could feel them flex if you slammed them too hard. A big auxiliary gauge cluster was bolted right in the driver's face. No relaxation allowed, only war. A fat rear anti-roll bar was welded in behind the seats like a steel spine, finally giving the chassis the stiffness it needed to survive high-speed cornering without folding in half. And then came the single most important moment, one short sentence that changed everything. This isn't a Mustang anymore. This is the GT350R. The first car where every sheet of metal, every bolt, every weld had one purpose and one purpose only: to embarrass anything dumb enough to line up next to it at the green light. When the Mustang rolled into Shelby American's shop in Venice, California, Carroll knew the heart of the beast had to be downright vicious if it was going to shut up every doubter. He started with Ford's high-performance 289 cubic inch V8, small, light, and already nasty when you let it off the leash. Shelby's crew went straight to work. Bigger valves, ported heads, a giant Holley 4-barrel sitting on a high-rise aluminum intake, and an aggressive solid lifter cam that turned the engine into a screaming banshee above 5,500 rounds per minute. That 289 wasn't just breathing fire. It was ready to get beaten on, lap after lap. All that fury got funneled through a Borg-Warner T10 close-ratio 4-speed. Short, brutal throws that kept the engine glued right in the meat of the power band. The drive shaft was beefed up with thicker walls so it wouldn't twist itself into a pretzel on a hole shot or in a high-speed corner. Power hit the rear axle through a Detroit Locker limited slip diff, making sure both tires hooked instead of one just smoking the hide off itself when the car was on the ragged edge. Underneath, the suspension was completely re-engineered. Stiffer springs, 1-inch front sway bar, Coney shocks tuned for the track, and traction bars out back turned the floaty grocery getter into a scalpel. Up front, oversized Kelsey Hayes disc brakes, the same ones used on the Cobra, shrugged off heat fade even after a dozen hard laps. The chassis got a network of weld-in braces and seam welding so the body wouldn't flex and fold under racing loads. None of this was about making the Mustang nice to drive. Every single change had one goal: turn Ford's pony car into the sharpest blade ever pointed at a racetrack. For the first time in its life, the Mustang wasn't just fast in a straight line. It was a weapon. What made the GT350R truly terrifying wasn't just the snarling 289 high-performance V8. It was the way that power got slammed into the pavement with zero apologies. Get behind the wheel, and you instantly understood why the racing crowd called it the original track slayer. From a dead stop, it hit 60 miles an hour in the low 5-second range, and it devoured the quarter mile so fast that a lot of 6-figure European exotics were left staring at Michigan license plates and wondering what the hell just happened. But the real shock wasn't the straight-line brutality. It was the way the car attacked corners. The stock Mustang floated and leaned like a boat. The R carved apexes like it was on rails, with a confidence that felt almost arrogant. The magazines didn't quite know what to do with it. Car Life called it a full race animal accidentally wearing a Mustang suit. Road and Track's test driver wrote that once the tack needle swept past 6,000 rounds per minute and that solid lifter cam came on song, the noise alone was enough to make you check if you'd left your survival instinct in the paddock. The steering was heavy, hyper-direct, and borderline violent. Every twitch of the thin wood rim wheel got an immediate muscular response from the chassis. It didn't ask. It demanded. Of course it had flaws. The ride was brutal, hit a pothole, and your spine filed a complaint. The stripped interior turned the cockpit into a loud, hot oven. But to the people who bought these cars, those weren't flaws. They were proof of life. Every rattle, every blast of heat, every jolt through the seat was the GT350R, reminding you it wasn't built to babysit you. It was built to win. And if you couldn't handle the punishment, it would happily find someone who could. When the GT350R finally hit the streets, it split the American car world clean in two. Half the country saw it as proof that Ford had finally gotten dead serious about racing. The other half thought Ford had lost its mind, turning the classy, youthful Mustang into some kind of caged animal that no longer belonged on the same planet as the grocery store parking lot. At almost twice the price of a regular Mustang, the R wasn't built to haul the kids to soccer practice on Saturday. It was built to win races on Sunday, full stop. That sticker shock, plus the brutality of the car itself, meant actual buyers were a tiny, hardcore club. Mostly SCCA racers and a handful of speed junkies who wanted the real thing and didn't care about comfort. Sales were microscopic. Ford only built a handful, just enough to satisfy the SCCA's homologation rules, and they never pretended it would be a volume model. To the average buyer, it was too stiff, too loud, and way too extreme for daily duty. But to the gearhead underground, the GT350R was a middle finger to everyone who'd ever called the Mustang cute. The car's real legacy had nothing to do with how many were sold, and everything to do with the line it erased in the sand. Before the R, there was the regular Mustang, and then there was everything else. After the R, the world knew the pony car could hang with purebred sports cars on any racetrack in the country. Ford suddenly had real credibility in SCCA and beyond, and the Mustang's image went from stylish cruiser to legitimate American performance icon practically overnight. The GT350R wasn't a sales strategy. It was a declaration of war. Ford wasn't just building cars anymore. They were building winners. Over time, the GT350R stopped being just a fast Mustang from the 60s. It became a full-blown American legend, the kind of car every real gearhead hopes to see in the metal at least once before they die. In the late-night stories swapped at racetracks and cruise-ins, people still talk about the SCCA seasons, when the R left Corvettes and Jaguars choking on its dust, drivers redlining the 289 trying to close a gap that only got bigger every lap. Those tales don't need to be written down in official record books. They live in the memories and the faint smell of 100 octane still stuck in old Nomex suits. Its rarity only feeds the myth. So few were built that every single survivor today is treated like museum-grade treasure. At auctions, a real R will bring numbers that make brand-new Shelbys look cheap, because the guys writing the checks aren't buying quarter-mile times. They're buying history, attitude, and a slice of the wildest, most fearless era American performance ever had. The R was never a street car wearing racing stickers. It was a race car that happened to have license plates. That purity is exactly why so many didn't survive. They were flogged, crashed, and torn apart in the pursuit of checkered flags. The ones that made it through are battle-scarred veterans, carrying dents and welds like medals. Yet everything that came after owes it a debt. Every Boss 302, every modern Shelby GT 350, every time Ford decides to build a Mustang that's more weapon than showpiece, you can still feel the ghost of the original R under the carbon fiber and magnetic shocks. It's the same daredevil spirit. Take risks, be different, and go straight for the throat of whoever thinks they're the fastest. The GT350R didn't just win races, it changed what a Mustang was allowed to dream of being. And it's still out there, somewhere, waiting to remind the world what fearless really sounds like. Looking back at the GT350R story, what hits hardest isn't just that a monster Mustang was born, it's that Ford finally stepped out of its own shadow. This car proved that guts and pure audacity can beat cubic inches and blank checks every single time. The GT350R carried Carroll Shelby's unshakable belief that a little pony car could humiliate giants, and somehow that belief rewrote reality. Today, when you stand next to a real R, you're not just staring at steel and paint and a snarling V8. You're looking at an era when speed was a declaration of war, and the racetrack was where an entire company's pride was on the line. Modern tech has taken us light years ahead, but almost nothing on the road right now can match the raw, unfiltered violence and honesty that car delivered straight to your spine. So if fate ever hands you the keys to a real GT350R, what do? Park it on a velvet rope and polish it twice a week? Or point it at a racetrack, dump the clutch, and let that 289 scream exactly the way Shelby intended the day it first rolled out of Venice, California? Your call. And after all this, Which Shelby legend do you want to dive into next? The original Cobra that scared Ferrari straight? The Daytona Coupe that conquered Europe? The GT40 that crushed Le Mans? Or the wild Super Snake that made the GT500 look tame? Name your poison. I'm ready when you are.